So one of the reasons why, as I told you before we started rolling tape, as we used to say in the old days, that I wanted to have you on is because you are becoming a stand and a voice for ethical business, especially for Black and Brown women. And this is something I'm super, super passionate about, and I always have been really, really passionate about.
Yeah.
But what what is drawing you from law to helping Black and Brown women create the professional satisfaction they crave, and especially in their own self-determined business? Like what's drawing you in there? Why not just stay with the law? I mean, that's an amazing calling in itself.
Yeah, so I became a coach 2018. With COVID, time is a construct, so I never know how many
I
years. It
know,
could
me
be
neither,
5, could be 10, could be 20.
right?
Um, so I just say the actual year and then you figure it out. But and so I started off coaching lawyers because I'm a lawyer. And around that time, even before all that happened in 2020 with the Black Lives Matter movement and all that, I really started to see parallels in myself between some of the clients of color I had and myself in terms of just the internalized racism that we face and how that affects us and how we present to the world, right? And even in business, owning your own business, being an entrepreneur is one of the main ways that people of color can really generate economic power. Like we can take control and generate economic power from that. But the internalized racism that we're constantly dealing with and that we stop ourselves, and I saw that in myself and I saw that in other women of color. I started reading more about it, I started thinking more about it, and I really wanted to empower them to feel like, no, you can do this thing, we can work through these issues, we can do it in an ethical and real way, not the online business way of you're going to make $6 million in 6 months. And I think a lot of people of color shy away from that because it sounds like BS, and a lot of it is.
Yeah.
And we've been able to survive by being practical, right? You don't keep going and thrive as a person of color unless you're practical and you can really see like that doesn't that sounds like a crock of I don't know if you can curse here,
Oh,
but
you
it
can
sounds like a
say
crock of
anything
hoo
you want. It's my
It sounds like
podcast.
a crock of shit.
It
It
is a
sounds like
crock
a
of
crock
shit.
of shit, and it is a crock of shit, and I have to be, very conscientious of the money I have, what I do with that money, and how I'm able to generate economic power and generational wealth with them. And so that's what kind of got me interested because I really feel like the online space and just business in itself is a way to do that. But we need to be real about what that looks like and how and the drive it takes to get it
Hmm.
done.
And also
Mm-hmm.
the internalized racism and how do we overcome it? I mean, one of the things I've focused on a lot in my life, in my work, is how do we overcome the patriarchy for women,
Yeah.
period. And then to add on
Right.
to that, the internalized racism and how it shapes, I mean, how it shapes for me, creative women, there've been the permission to dream, to even think about what they might want to create. It feels like there's so often we don't even give ourselves, our imaginations are stunted.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just like you mentioned, women, there is that issue of being able to dream, kind of not feeling confident enough to use your voice or that your voice matters. I noticed that as a theme. Among women of color, one of the themes that I noticed is that we're kind of afraid of being seen. And I know it sounds like, like Black women seem to be the ones always standing up, but when it comes to actually being vulnerable and being seen, which entrepreneurship in our culture, it's very vulnerable. It's
It
public
is.
vulnerability, putting your social feed out there. We're not into that. And that's going to really harm you if you're trying to market yourself as a brand. And it's like, listen, I'm going to need you to put your picture on the
Mm-hmm.
website. Right? They're like, so you need my face, my pic, yes, your picture. But that's an issue because that's one of the things that comes with internalized racism. You kind of don't feel like people want to see you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like people aren't going to be attracted to buy from you because you're a Black woman. So maybe if I just hide that and put these stock images, I'll gain more, followers and buyers. So there's a lot of things to overcome, and we all have our stuff. But I just kind of felt called to start talking about those issues and to build something around really making business work for Black and brown women.
I love that. It makes me just want to go, and it reminds me of one of the blog posts that you wrote that I thought was just brilliant about hiring a Black coach if you're a Black woman or person or a brown person, hiring a coach of color. And you told this great story about when you were super into Oprah, and Oprah had a financial expert that was telling a Black woman, cut your hair expenses. And you were like,
right,
no. And Oprah also was like, no. Black women need to have their hair done. And can you say more about some of your takeaways in that post? Because it was such an eye-opener to me as a white woman.
Yeah. So I wrote a post called Why You Need a Black Coach. And just that Oprah story, it was something that stayed in my mind. I can't tell, it was like the 90s, right? Oprah. And she had this whole series on about, families who were in financial crisis. And this one, a well-known, well-respected financial coach was commenting on this woman, and she was like getting her hair done every 2 weeks or whatever. And they're like, yeah, you should do your hair yourself and do it from home. And I remember being young and feeling even then like, yeah, no, like, and like, no. And but I was like, is that really what's going to happen? And then Oprah, what I loved about Oprah and why she resonates so much with so many groups of people is she says the thing. Because she said to the coach, listen, like, Black women in their hair, feeling like you are put together on the outside really determines how you feel when you're out in the world and what you're able to produce. So telling this woman, not only are you dealing with like financial issues, but like you're not going to look good while you're doing it, and you have to deal with being a Black woman in the South. She was like in South Carolina or something. She's like, no, you have to give her something. I'm so sorry. That needs to be factored into the budget. And of course, Oprah said it a lot more eloquently than I'm saying it now, but she was able to feel into that space and explain it in a way like she needs this. And I think it's the same way with coaches, is why when we go to therapists, we look for therapists who maybe specialize in whatever our issue is. Like if we have an issue with substance abuse or something like that, or we're looking for a female therapist who can understand gender issues and all that. There's an unspoken energy and unspoken language when you meet with a professional or someone who is dealing in spaces that are very vulnerable and who can talk to into those experiences because they've had them. You're a wonderful writer. I'm not sure if you've had this experience, but I often feel like the English language is missing words, right?
Which is why we make up words, right?
We make up words, but I feel like we're missing words because there's those experiences, the experiences you have as a parent that you can't really tell somebody until they're in them.
And one of the things you said in that article or the blog post, the real issue is that the coach didn't seek to understand her client's values or culture before giving advice.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was, that's something I think many of us have been learning a lot about in the last decade.
Yeah. And I think, again, that's not her experience. That's not something that someone even brought to her before as an issue. She's never had to, or at that time, she didn't have to go into spaces where she had to adapt to the culture and learn the values. She was the culture or the normalized culture. And so she just assumed that everyone was going to be in that same have those same cultural values and all that. And I think you're right. Now we're at a time where it's like, no, when you are dealing with rules in a coaching space or professional space, you have to understand their cultural context and their values to really understand their decisions and what they're doing. It might not make sense to you, but it makes sense to them for a reason. And that's why I kind of said, like, I understand. There's like a knowing. I'll get on the call with some of like newer clients or people who are coming to me who are of color, and they can just say words like, like I'm at work and and that's the whole sentence.
Right.
And I totally know, and I totally know what they're saying, right? Because I can fill in the gaps in the language that I feel like, the English language doesn't provide for. That's what I mean when I say that.
I get it.
How do you say differently? The word is it's the same word.
you've been very creative and very non-traditional in your approach. I mean, you started an online law firm when that was pretty out there. How do what fuels your creativity? What fuels your desire to
Mm.
keep reinventing this, to keep, because it's not easy. I mean, you said we were having an email exchange. You're like, nothing about creating this new outshoot of my business is easy. And I get it. I mean, creating really effective coaching programs is a great work of art.
Yeah, yeah. That's such a great question. I think like what keeps me going is I'm an internally motivated person. I learned that a long time. I can care less honestly about competition. I was never like if we're in a race and I feel like you're trying to like really beat me, I'll be like, go ahead, you really need this. I'm not I don't you know.
That is a, can we just pause there for a second? Because I know I don't want you to lose your thought, but for so many people listening, they just went, what? How did you do that? How did you stop looking around you and comparing yourself? How did you find that internal motivation? Because we know scientifically that is the best way for us to move forward as creatives.
Right, right. And I think I've just always kind of been internally referenced. I think some people and it works for them. They are competitors, they're athletes and there's a place for them and they make sense in our culture. That's kind of the dominant way of producing that we see. There's no model for people who are kind of internally referenced and I think as a creative, I've even when I was young, I always felt motivated to do well and to learn things. And it was just a sort of almost like a challenge to myself like can you be brave enough to try this thing and the more I do it honestly it feels good
Mm.
right I wouldn't it feels good when when you first have the idea and when you're done in the middle when it's like all crazy you're like what who I did this to myself. I literally assigned myself this. No one made me do
That's true.
this.
That's the thing about intrinsic motivation, right, Toya? Like, there's nobody to blame.
There's nobody to blame but you.
Oh my God, I'll never forget this one. That's so
uh,
true. It's like I got myself into this. Oh, I love that.
yeah, yeah, but when you're done and you see what you've created and how far you've come and the lessons that you've learned and your ability to translate those lessons and to help other people, there's just something deeply gratifying about that. And I think that's what keeps me going. It's not the competition though. I don't know why. Like I have a lot of family members who are competitors, who are athletes, and it's like we play games at holiday time and they're like you have to they're on their team you have to win like this is not I know she's only 4 years old but tell her to be ready right she needs to be ready to play because we're gonna win and that works for them they're very successful that's just not how I grew up that's just never how I was.
I love that. So anyway, back to my original
Yeah.
question, which is so internal motivation, what else is motivating you, inspiring you? Because it does seem like you love to learn. I mean, you're teaching yourself coaching for business. You're teaching yourself how to coach Black and brown women.
Absolutely. I recently redid the Clifton Strengths Finder, and one of my like the top two were achievement, and so it's like an internal motivation, and learner.
Mm.
I find immense joy in learning things. I think when I started coaching, I used to say like, if I could just figure out a way to like read stuff and learn stuff and then just tell other people about it, that would be like that's the business I want. That's what I want to do.
I think we were separated at birth, me too.
Yes.
And the sooner I can learn it and tell you, the happier it makes me.
That's it. That's it. Because it makes me feel good like like this was confusing for me. I figured this out. Now I can tell it for you. You don't have to be confused for
Mhm.
months and years. I can shortcut this for you. I think that is what inspires me. That's what keeps me going, and I feel like coaching is that. We are a social being for a reason. We often can't see ourselves. We think we can see ourselves and we know ourselves around. Somebody sort of turns that mirror and say, no, this is what I see. This is what's really coming through. Then you really, really learn yourself. I always joke, my mom always used to say to my dad, like, I know you better than you know yourself. And when I was a kid, I would be like, what does that even mean? But she saw his reflection. She saw him. And when you're just internally referenced sometimes and you don't have spaces and places where people, you can be vulnerable and they can really see you, you can't really see the full picture or the full sort of perspective. And coaching kind of helps me, like going back to the inspiration, motivation, helps me to shine that light for other people, to illuminate new things,
Mm-hmm.
to help them learn new ways. And yeah, I love it. You know, this is, it's, I do. I love it.
I can tell. One of the things that I find really interesting about being a learner who then wants to teach people what I just learned is there you really have to develop the meta skill, META, of looking at yourself as a learner so that you can break it down for whoever you're coaching or teaching. Is that something that's come natural to you, or is it something that you really had to develop, particularly in this new program that you're leading, the self-determined business?
Yes, that's right. Self-determined business. So I don't think it's something that's come natural. I think it's a skill that I developed over time. And I'm sure you find this. It's like now when I'm learning something new and it really resonates, I'm always like, okay, I want to break this down for my audience.
Mhm.
So if I were teaching this, like what are the key points or the lessons that I would take away from this? And then what order would I need to present this information in a way that makes sense for them? And I think that's just doing it, right? Being a creative or being an entrepreneur, you don't learn how to do that until you do it. It's you
Mhm.
kind of have to do it, be in the muck of it, you know, create, say I'm going to put out this program, and then you're like, okay, these people signed up, I have to deliver them something. Right? Then you learn.
Okay, this is what I promised. Let
Then
me go
you
back and
learn.
read the sales page. What did I actually
Let me go back
promise?
and read it. Okay, okay. And then you get feedback, right? And that's a very vulnerable process to
Mhm.
say, did this land for you? Was this, how did this work for you? Did this make sense? Okay, now in this next lesson, let me take and incorporate that feedback. Maybe I need more diagrams. Maybe I need more visuals or whatever it may be to really bring home the point. So no, it wasn't a natural thing. Definitely something I've learned over time and continue to learn.
I think for
Again,
me,
Jen, you're like me. If I could learn all day, I would. If I could just say one class and someone else would pay for it.
I know an acquaintance has just started her PhD, and I was like, a part of me was like, oh, now mind you, I never got a master's,
Mm-hmm.
but then I thought, oh no, but I'm such a non-traditional learner. I would never do well if someone said you have to learn this. I have to learn what
Mm.
I want to learn. But one of the
Right.
things that it took me many years to figure out was I always self-identified as a writer, and that was my main gig for a long time. But when I started to teach more, it took me a long time to value teaching as a deeply creative act, as creative as writing.
Mm-hmm.
Has that been true for you, or is there some way that you have evolved in how you see yourself as a creative?
Yeah. So when I was a lawyer, and definitely for a large time when I was a student, I never even identified myself as a creative.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It was like those people are creative.
Right,
I'm
and
doing
I'm a
more
lawyer.
serious,
Yeah.
yeah, legal, whatever. And then, but what you find even in the is you have to write well and persuasively, and you have to be creative in terms of how you present arguments in a way that translates to multiple audiences, whether that be a judge who is aware of the legal circumstances or a jury where you have to speak plainly. So there's a creativity to that. But I really started recognizing sort of or identifying myself more as a creative the more I got into coaching. And I should say, even before the creative part, making the leap in my identity from just being a lawyer to being like a coach, that was a leap all into of itself. I had all this stuff wrapped up in the idea of what it means to be a coach and what it means to be a lawyer and what's more professional and what's not and all this nonsense. And
Say more about that, because I find identity issues so fascinating, because they can both help us move towards our creative and life goals, or they can block us without even realizing it. So did you think a coach was sleazy or
not sleazy. I just thought like
fluffy,
I
like a
thought it
Saturday Night
wasn't.
Live skit?
Yeah, not yeah, just more like not as serious,
Mhm.
right? Like I am a serious legal professional, right? And there's all of this egoic stuff that comes with being a lawyer. People automatically assume you know what's going on. You walk into any room, they want you to take charge. So there's like all this thing that feeds your ego when you're a lawyer. And then saying, okay, I'm a coach. Are people going to start to think differently? What does the legal community think of me
Mm.
now that I'm saying I'm a coach? What does all of that mean? And realizing that I had a lot of like my identity trapped in these things and it was holding me back for sure, right? I think a lot of lawyers hold themselves back in terms of where they want to go next in their career, whether it's in the law or not, because of those ego issues, right? It's cool to work at a law firm and make a lot of money and look like you're doing all these cool things. Meanwhile, I talk to several people who are like crying every day
Mhm.
and they hate going into work and like there's serious issues going on, like the numbers are staggering. So yeah, that identity piece, just recognizing that moving into coaching was a part of my journey, part of my creative journey, and creativity is really about, I think, expressing the core of yourself, right? It's about, there's something inside of you. We all have this purpose. I believe this. And creativity is about figuring out how to express that, even though you got all this stuff. And you kind of have to be brave enough and sort of trust yourself enough to say, okay, I'm going to peel back this layer and show this part. And this coaching thing seems like the vehicle for it. And it's, man, as you know, it's very creative. You get to just make, you just like, oh, I have this idea. I see this problem. How am I going to solve this problem? It's immensely creative. So once I made the leap identity wise from being a lawyer to being a lawyer and a coach and all that, the creativity came with it.
And you're also being really creative about how you're helping women and Black and brown women in particular look at how to earn a living. So let's talk about that, because I love to get into money, and
Okay.
money as creative people, but also money as self-employed, as having a business. And I think the thing that I see over and over again stops so many of the women who work with me to create their creative thing is marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And I just see so much baggage around, from it's gross and I don't want to bug people, those kind of old messages. But more, when they get kind of past that, they don't know what to do. They don't know how to
Yeah.
create a cohesive marketing approach. So take us into how you're doing it for your business, because
Yeah.
you're building out from being a lawyer to helping lawyers to being a business coach.
Yeah. Yeah. So the marketing for me, I see it like on two sides. So I call it like messaging, which is like what I'm saying. And then the other side of it is the marketing, is like what language am I going to use to draw in the clients and customers, right? So from the messaging side, in sort of being able to be ethical and communicate the values that I want to communicate and what I want to put out into the world, I really think about kind of 3 to 4 core messages that I want to center, my business around. So for self-determined business, it's this idea of generating generational wealth in an ethical way. It's the idea of building community, about doing online business differently, about recognizing that there are sort of mindset blocks that aren't just like our normal coachy ones, but there's internalized racism. There are real
Right.
issues that we have to confront when we're doing businesses. So those are sort of core messages that I'll decide like, okay, this is what I want to talk about. And then I'll do like some market research and say, like, the person who's looking at my business, they're not going to say, oh, I'm having issues with internalized racism. That's how I'm dealing with
Just the
whatever.
other day, I was saying to my girlfriend, I'm having issues with
Just the other
internalized
day,
racism.
I was thinking it was the patriarchy who was causing me to, like, they're not saying that. What they're saying is, I'm not getting traction in my business. I don't know how to do social media, whatever those words are. You can go to forums and places and where your target audience hangs out and look for their language. How are they expressing it? And then you can like infusing that language into your core message. And so that's kind of how I stay true to myself, by starting with my core messages, my core values first, and then using the language of my audience to make sure they see, like, oh, she's speaking to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
then
I always
once,
call that,
go
I
ahead,
call that
yeah,
stretching to connect.
yeah,
It's like, this is what I care about, but now how do I help them understand it's the same thing?
yeah, yeah. And so one of the challenges I think I'm having now in marketing is the transition part. So I've built up this marketing or this brand, or coaching just lawyers, like women lawyers, and now I'm branching out into professionals of colors, so lawyers plus whoever else. And how do you manage that transition so the audience comes along with you, people don't feel left out, and you're expanding your reach? And honestly, I'm just learning as I go. I'm sticking to, okay, I have these core ideas, these core messages. I'm going to put these messages out and see kind of what happens. And again, that's creativity and vulnerability right there. It's like I'm not sure what's going to happen. I would love to know what's going to happen.
No, you wouldn't. You'd be bored if you knew, right? You want to keep learning.
Yeah,
So, well, let's keep talking about
true.
marketing. I love everything you just
Mm-hmm.
said. I completely agree. And then how are you getting that message out? Where I know one of the things that I was reading on your website, you had a really interesting sort of 3 or 4 actions that you like to take. And it wasn't so much, let me just show up everywhere on social media, which I think a lot of people think of when they think of marketing. And one of them, I believe, was really making sure you're connecting, that you're emailing or direct messaging with likely clients.
Yeah, because I think we're in the social media age. People just immediately jump, as you mentioned, to like, okay, I need to go on Instagram and I need to get a 10 bajillion, and then that's how my business is going to take off. But I just want to tell people a little secret that there were businesses before Instagram. There were businesses before Facebook. There were businesses before there was an internet. And so those principles of reaching out to audiences or to a market still exist. And so I am a fan of connecting with people, reaching out to people directly. I do on LinkedIn like a direct message strategy where I talk to people directly. I am a fan of building relationships and networking. I like people. I like learning about people. I like meeting cool people. And so if you think about sort of marketing as, oh, wait, I get to tell people what I do, I get to meet cool people in return, and then just build a relationship, it feels good. The marketing feels good. It doesn't feel salesy. It doesn't feel slimy. And I think those are just like some of the avenues to sort of to do that, right?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I
Mm-hmm.
love that. And I think creatives, I'm thinking of authors that I work with, and you know, painters and people who make objects,
Yeah.
whether it's an exclusive object they're going to sell for a lot, or a book that, I sell for $6.95, 14.95 in paper. That's where it seems to marketing often seems to break down, that people can think, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I'm creating a relationship with a client or who's going to hire me for a talk or as a coach, but it really seems to break down when we think about spreading the word in a larger way. Have you seen anything that's helped you or any of your clients with that?
For spreading the word in a larger way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for selling a book or selling a limited series of posters or something that doesn't feel so relational, maybe.
Yeah. So some of the sort of strategies that some of my clients have used and that I advocate, it's sort of doing like workshops and seminars for associations, let's say. So you're mentioning like artists, perhaps, I don't know, I'm gonna make up there. I know there's like NFTs. Is that, I think there's like a thing with NFTs and art. I don't,
I'm just
something
gonna
like that.
nod as if I know what you're talking about.
There's some sort of, there's sort of like, it's with the oh lord, like Bitcoin stuff, and there's like art, and you can do workshops for those types of groups. You can start speaking about the in those places for those types of groups. That's ways to kind of get the word out. And then honestly, like, I guess I come from a very sort of grassroots, person to person, like my mom went to church and that kind of thing. And so a lot of it is really telling everyone, you know, like if you know pastors, if you know people in the community who are know a lot of people and they know about what you're doing, it's still kind of a relational approach, but it is a way to kind of get started. And once you get started, you'll start to move more people and bring more people to your work.
Yeah, I think we do tend to think big in a way that is overwhelming instead of who's in my network.
Yeah.
I forget that too. I forget that
Yeah.
too.
you you'd be surprised with personalizing things and looking to who are in your network, like how much that can do. And then being a little vulnerable when you talk about your work. So I know artists will show, you know, the art speak for, they think the art speaks for themselves, but there is something courageous in saying, you know, this is the reason why I created this piece. I was dealing with this issue. I was dealing with divorce. I was dealing with loss. I was dealing with this. And from this, this came out. This was my interpretation of my experience. There's a connection in that story. And I think that is important as well. Even if you're selling like a tangible product, people want to know the why behind it and everything.
That's
And
so
being willing to
true.
share yourself in that way and be honest is also attractive. Yeah.
I was in this summer, I was up high in the, I live in Colorado and I was up in Silverton and went into this little tiny store and it was a native woman owned it. She had fantastically curated some art and jewelry in this little tiny space. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it was as small as my tiny little office. And I completely connected with her. We connected. Her grandparents had been Taos Pueblo Indians. I have a long connection with Taos, the
Mm-hmm.
town. My husband has a connection with the Pueblo. And, immediately I wanted to buy something because of that connection to her story.
Right.
And she was very vulnerable in sharing that. And it all started because she had pictures of her grandparents up on the wall.
Right.
And I'm like, oh,
Right.
that's a Pueblo. Is that Taos Pueblo? And we started
Right.
talking. So yeah, we overlook the humanity in marketing. We overlook the connections. We don't think we're worthy of it or that it's interesting. Or I know for me, does this ever happen to you?
Mm-hmm.
I get almost like I almost want to be invisible sometimes.
Oh, all the time, Jen. If I could. But that's not right. That's not what we're meant. We're meant to share these gifts. We meant to share ourselves, right? And so part of sharing ourselves is figuring out how to not hide, not be invisible, um, and really kind of go for it in those ways. And I love that you mentioned she had that photo of like her family and those things. Some people would shy away from putting that in their store, right?
Mm-hmm.
Putting notes of their history of themselves on display for people who know you and who don't. You never know someone's reaction.
Yeah.
But that was an act of, I'm going to show you myself and this is who's running the store. And I
Mm-hmm.
want you now, whenever you're there, you're probably going to pop by and
Oh, you
all
betcha.
that works.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
haven't forgotten her. I'm sure next summer we'll be back.
Yeah.
But there's the you brought up earlier the issue of Black and brown women being more reluctant to show themselves. How do you help with that?
Mm-hmm.
How do you help them know it's safe or maybe it's not safe? I mean, women in general have safety issues around showing up in
Mm-hmm.
many ways,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's online or in that example in that woman's store. She could easily get racist comments from people
Right. Right.
who don't know anything about anything.
I think one of the things that I'm big on with my clients is building like self trust. right? Huge self-trust. And why I say that is that I'll give an example. So Van Jones, who used to work for the Obama administration, he recently did an interview and he was talking about politics and how like he considers Black people to be the most politically savvy people in the world because we really can see, okay, we can move elections and we can see how things change, and we can see like this is the play that's going to move us the needle forward. It's maybe not the big jump, but it's going to move the needle forward. And so with my clients of color, I'm always saying like you can trust yourself in that room, right? So if you look in the room and you're in the room and you're saying, okay, like you mentioned, is it safe? Usually it's safe. Usually it's more like an internal fear of judgment. So it's really about like, is this really not safe for me, right? Not safe for me physically, safe for me in terms of my job or whatever. Am I willing to take that risk? Because we have historically had to take those risks. And we know like, okay, I'm going to say this thing and I know I'm going to lose my job, right? I know this is going to happen to me. And so you can kind of judge for yourself, okay, what's going to happen here? And then if you feel like it's safe and like you're willing to take the risk, whatever the risk is, then say the thing, then show up in the space and trust that your knowledge, that your creativity, that all that you studied and all that you learned is enough, right? And so in showing up, I really just try to encourage that sense of self-trust and self-efficacy. Trust yourself, believe yourself. If you're in a room and you're like, this is what's happening in the energy in this room, right? And I know I'm using coachy terms, but I'm with creatives. This is what's happening here. This is that. The circumstances are this. I have a point of view and my point of view is this. I think it will contribute to the space. And even though I'm scared, I'm going to say the thing. Right. And that's, you do it bit by bit, practice by practice. You're not always going to hit it every time. Sometimes you'll be in the space and you'll see a time to speak up and you don't because you're scared or you go back into yourself. But just track that. Like, okay, I saw it. Next time I'm there, I'm going to speak up.
I do think it's
I'm going to practice.
Yeah, I'm going to practice. Yeah, we were saying
yeah,
the same.
I'm going to practice.
Yeah, that is it.
Yeah.
I notice that when I get out of the practice of sharing about myself or my work publicly, it gets harder and harder and I get more and more invisible. Yeah. And in some ways, it's nice because it's a rest. You know,
right.
I was saying to a friend, I think I said this on another episode, I'm not sure, but a friend said, yeah, I've been experiencing a lot of creative burnout during the pandemic. And a friend was like, well, you've been doing this for 30 years. Of course you get burned out. And I said, yeah, and there's this aspect of being an entrepreneur, a public creative, where you're like, let's put on a show. Hi, here I am today. And as people have heard this season, I got booted off Instagram for using the word vagina during an Instagram live. And they totally took my account, and you know how hard it is to grow your account. And I just haven't had the will or the interest to go back. So the good side of that is I'm like, wow, it feels really good not to be on a vacation and going, oh, let me take the cool picture so everybody knows I'm having the cool vacation. Right. But on the other hand, it contributes to that sense of I could just be invisible and kind of it's a weird feeling of getting too quiet. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. What comes up for me as you're speaking is the difference between sort of taking a break and making a decision to take a break and step away versus invisibility.
That's a very good distinction.
I think those are two different points, because I don't think even now you're not invisible. You may be, not on Instagram, and we could talk Instagram and their algorithms and about who they block. Okay, that's a whole other conversation. Vagina should be the least of their worries.
Hey, wait, that would make I have a running gag on the podcast. That would make a really good tattoo. Vagina is the least of their worries.
100%. But I think like you can deciding to feed yourself and nourish yourself and to share yourself in ways that feel affirming to yourself and your values. That's a decision. And so is caring about yourself, taking a break. invisibility doesn't feel like a decision. It feels like something that's happening to you that you feel like you can't, it's like a cloak covering you that you can't come from under, right? And when you decide visible is the word I'm looking for, then you uncloak yourself. And once you uncloak yourself, how you express that can be anywhere: Instagram, podcast, blog, whatever you want to do. You can go on the corner, get your little soapbox, and start speaking too. If that's what you want to do.
That's what I love that. That's brilliant, Toya.
Yeah.
That is brilliant. No, not the soapbox, but what you just said. The distinction between, oh yeah, what's nourishing to me is very different than I have to hide because I don't feel worthy or I don't feel safe or I'm not
Mm-hmm.
trusting myself. That is gold. Thank you. Thank you for giving me a little
Yeah.
therapy there. I appreciate that. What do you hope that women in the program, the self-determined business, what do you hope that they most will learn about making money for themselves?
What I hope, or the core of what I want for those women, is to know, one, that it's possible,
Mm-hmm.
right?
That's
Right.
huge. That's huge. That
Yes.
goes back to that whole identity issue we were
I
talking
do.
about.
Right, right. That it's possible to make money for yourself in a sustainable way that sustains your life, that sustains your family. That it doesn't have to look like what everyone else is doing. Like, you don't have to be an Instagram influencer. You don't want to be an influencer. Guess you can create a business and not be an influencer. And I want people to know that a sustainable business that gives you freedom, that allows for creativity and feed your soul, doesn't have to look like you're making $10 million in 10 minutes, right? The majority of Americans, I think it's some very small amount, maybe it's 4%. That might be wrong, but it's lower than 10% of Americans make over $250,000 a year, right? So that means the majority of us are surviving and thriving making less than that. So if you could create a business for yourself where you basically are replacing your salary, which is so possible and so doable, and it gives you the freedom to create, the freedom to be with your family, to do what you want to do, why not do that? And
Mm-hmm.
to be in a place where you don't have to deal with, as Black and brown women say, maybe the things that hamper your confidence, like microaggressions, or being, you start to question, am I as smart as I thought
Mm-hmm.
I was? I've been
Mm-hmm.
passed up for all these promotions and all that. Like, if you could end that for yourself, and then when you get to employing people, end that for other people too, people who have been othered for whatever reason. Like, that's where, to me, the gold is. That's where the magic is. It's the ultimate, like, F you. I mean,
I love it. It is. It is the ultimate FU. That's one of the things, one of the
yeah.
questions I've been asked so often in my creative professional life as a writer and teacher and such is how did you keep doing it? Like, how did you do the
Mm-hmm.
work? Like, why didn't you just lay on the couch or, and I'm like, it was so motivating to be a fuck you to everybody who told me I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And so motivating as a woman and somebody who had undiagnosed learning disabilities until end of college,
Right.
all those stories of you can't
Right.
because you're a woman, because you're a cute woman,
Oh,
right?
yes. Yep.
Right, especially
Yep.
for, I'm 58, so especially
Yep.
for that gender, it's like, just shut up and
Yeah.
be quiet and be cute and marry somebody.
Right. Right. Right.
So many of those stories, they still motivate me. You can hear the anger in
Yeah.
my voice.
Yeah. 100%. It's very much like, I can sustain and thrive
Mm-hmm.
without having to fit into your box.
Exactly.
And I can help other people who don't fit in like me do the same thing
And be a model for that.
and be a model for that. And my hope, that's where we're going as a culture. And I think, being able to have a business online is a part of that. I think it's being able to see all that and do all that online is a part of why our culture is shifting. And I'm just hoping for my nieces and nephews and the people that come after me that they have a different experience that they have a different experience and that they're able to express themselves and feel free to do that. Um, yeah.
Do you think it's important for you to be really in people's faces about doing online business differently, more ethically? Do you call people out who aren't doing it, or are you more going back to what you said, I lead with my values and I just don't look at all that other crap?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not a call people out type of person. That's just not my energy at this point. My energy at this point is unconditional support for women and people of color. Unconditional support and love. I think a lot of what we get from different spaces, our families, from the systems that surround us, it's like if you get good enough grades, if you're pretty enough as a woman, if you're small enough,
Mm-hmm.
then we will help you, support you, whatever, whatever, whatever. And so I want to be a space of unconditional support and community for people who are othered, who feel that way. And so that's where my energy goes. The calling out part, I think there's people who are far smarter than me, who know more about the history of things and all of that, and they have the energy to expend on that. That's just not where my energy flows.
I
And it's
love
just a
that.
choice.
Yeah, it's a choice.
Yeah.
It's a good choice. I think it's a healthy choice. Not that the other choices
Yeah.
are wrong, but I like that choice. So I'm going to ask you a
Yeah.
really dangerous question. This is the question
Okay.
I ask everybody at the end of the
Yeah.
podcast, but this is going to be
Yeah.
really hard for you. So I'm just setting it up. What do you want to learn next?
Wow. What I want to learn next is, this is going to sound because I'm talking to you, but I promised my husband, I've been kicking around this book idea for a while. And I promise I'm not setting this up, but you asked the question. And I promised him that I would do it by a certain time. So that's what I want to learn next is I feel like I have enough like content and ideas, but the proposal part, the making it work, all of that, are next. That's in the next frontier. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I'm in your corner. I'll help you. I'm excited. The
Thank you,
world
Jen.
needs your book. Toya, thank you so much. I could feel your unconditional love and support in your words and your presence. And I'm excited for your future. And I'm so glad we're connected.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Jen. I really enjoyed our conversation and getting to know you a little bit more. It's been a really fun time.